Okay, guys, we're going to get started. We've tried to weave in some short briefings just to educate people on some topics that we've got bills, coming up. And so this is sort of in that vein. We've got a briefing today, and you see the study in changes in forest and tree canopy in Maryland. We, have some bills in the queue on that subject. And today we've got Josh Bollinger, Communications Coordinator at the University of Maryland College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and Susan Minnemeyer, Principal Consultant from Chesapeake Conservancy. And who else do we have at the table? So we know who we are.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'm Josh. That's Susan Minnemeyer immediately to my left. Second to my left is Dr. Aditi Dubé. She's also with the Hughes Center for Agroecology. She was our research assistant on this. And furthest to my left is Dr. Kate Everts. She's the executive director of the Hughes Center. They're all here for technical support. What I'm going to try to do is give you a broad stroke of what the results were, and then any technical questions I can't answer, I may pass it off to them.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'm going to let you proceed. We have a lot of bills this afternoon, but I think this is a topic that is new for some of us, and would like to, kind of get an overview. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for holding this briefing. We agree that this is a very important topic, and I will try to keep it brief because I know you have lots of things to do. So again, I'm Josh Bollinger, Communications Coordinator for the Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology. I'm just going to go into a quick what we are about before I move into the results. The Hughes Center was founded in 1999, co-founded by former Governor Harry R. Hughes. We really have a mission of research, outreach, and collaboration, but with a focus on research and trying to do the science and research where there are the greatest gaps that are facing big gaps that are facing some of the greatest issues in Maryland and agriculture, forestry in the Chesapeake Bay. Sometimes we do research at the request of the legislature, which is what this study was. The legislature requested this study in 2019, then again in 2021, which is, and now we have the results for you. So in order to give you a little bit of context here, I just wanted to overview some forest policy that relates to this study. First, we have the Forest Conservation Act of 1991. That goal of that act was to minimize the loss of Maryland's forest resources, during land development by making the identification and protection of forests and other sensitive areas an integral part of the site planning process. So what that means basically is any activity requires an application for a subdivision or a grading permit or sediment control permit that's at least 1 acre or greater in size. So it sets standards. It's subject to the Forest Conservation Act, and that sets standards for the identification, retention, and replanting of forests and trees. And that can include in sensitive areas in the state, which is like wetlands next to streams, whatnot. This requires a forest conservation plan, which under law includes tree protection specifications, mitigation planting plan, and a maintenance agreement, and that can be long-term, placed on retained forest and mitigation areas. There's also the Forest Preservation Act of 2013, which really builds on the Forest Conservation Act by setting a standard and attempt to maintain what the estimated 40% tree cover is for the state at the time, and also to set a standard for no net loss of forests. And then the other relevant legislation here for our discussion today is the Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021, which in addition to recertifying the study, it sets a goal to plant 5 million trees and also permits retention mitigation banks. And I'll get to what mitigation banks are shortly, but it permits retention mitigation banks authorized before December 31st, 2020 to continue selling credits until June 30th, 2024. So retention mitigation banks under that law are being phased out in 2024. And that'll be a point a little bit further down the line. So get to what the study is about. The legislature provided us some funding for this. The Hughes Center also put in some funding to complete this because we thought it's such an important task. But it's a very, very wide-ranging study. It's really important to note that this is the most comprehensive study of its kind for Maryland and potentially the country. So due to its scale, what resulted is a very nuanced study, which not only looks at results statewide on average, but it also takes a more fine scale view, looking into local and regional trends that when you compare it to the statewide averages, it shows high variability in data. So just keep that in mind as I'm going through this, that statewide averages can tell a different story than the local trends that we also see. So we looked into several areas. So as you can see here, forest and tree canopy extent, overall the whole state, what the health of those forests are, our progress towards some goals set in Chesapeake Bay restoration, so sort of the land conversion of forest and tree canopy over time. We looked into but basically all the protected areas of the state, get some percentages there. And also we looked into issues with mitigation banking and some forest and tree planting programs that we have throughout the state. So I'll get into the key findings here because we wanted to put this up front. So as I said, you're going to see a variability in data when we start getting into the key findings. But what this study found is that the rate of forest loss over time is evening out. So if you're looking really at when the policies were put into place in 1991 and 2013, we're seeing a rate of decline. But however, since the 2013 policy in particular, that rate is starting to even out. So loss isn't as steep as it used to be. However, again, this is the variability in the data between statewide and local averages. We're also seeing that locally, especially in central Maryland, loss continues at high levels, and that's most associated with development and pressure from growth. So loss is occurring in region, but statewide totals are being offset by gains in other regions of the state. So, however, our study also notes opportunities for Maryland to transition from forest and tree canopy loss to gain. So as we're looking through and you're considering policies into the future, consider, is a one-size-fits-all approach to Maryland forest policy always appropriate, or does sometimes it need to be customized to the local trends that we're seeing? So I'm just going to go over quick what data sets we use just to show you that this is science-based. We use 3 different data sets to form our conclusions. They all, one, for instance, goes back 90 years. They all have different varying years, but we tried to combine it best we can to form our conclusions. The very far one on the left is more of a sampling, but as you get into the other ones, the one in the middle is sort of a 30, we could consider that our medium resolution satellite data. And the one on the far right is really high resolution, great data. You can see what's happening on a 1 meter scale, and you can actually see the changes on the land over time. So that's what we use to form the conclusions for this study. And here is our statewide averages. So you're looking at 2 lines here. The first line is the green line. That's our tree coverage, forest and tree canopy, outside forest total. And then the white line here is commercial timberland. But what we're really concerned about here today for the purposes of this study is that green line. So when we break down, excuse me. So over time, again, this is what I was telling you about the decline in loss over time. If you look at that around to the dates of 2013 on the bottom line there, and you can see a lot more green points there, it's starting to even out a little bit. Study that our estimates between those 3 data sets that we used estimate between 39 and 42% of the state's total land area is in tree coverage. So we're technically hitting the statewide goal that has been set of 40% according to those 3 data points. But again, part of what my message here is today is there's a variability between these statewide averages and the local trends. So I'm going to go into, this is what happened to these forests that we're losing. If you see here on the very far left of this graph, there's a bunch of lines. The very far bottom one is the very big green line. That's the one bar, that's what we're paying attention to. And there's a bottom swoosh over to a red bar on the side, which stands for development. So between 2013 and 2018, that's what this accounts for, excuse me. Forests accounted for 49% of all areas that changed in 2013, and about 38% of that was associated with development, was the largest association with that. So,
Hey, Josh, wait, hold on just 1 second.
did I click something wrong?
Yeah, we're going to get our crack whip
I'm sorry.
person to get you rebooted up here so we could.
Are you on a slide?
Yes, I'm on this slide. I'm sorry. I will no longer hit X's on any of these windows. That is my fault. I was trying to read the slide. Anyway, so yeah, so that's so
Hey,
this
Josh,
is
Josh,
basically showing the land
Josh,
conversions.
Maybe you want to enlarge it like you had,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How do you do that with
Okay.
PDF?
It's
View.
Yes.
Okay. I apologize. Thank you very much for the help. So this is what I was talking about when the differences between statewide averages and the local data we're seeing in regional trends. So if you look at this bar, you're going to see a huge loss in central Maryland, and that's where we're seeing the greatest loss occurring. So when we break down the data regionally, we see that two counties in particular, Montgomery and Prince George's, accounted for more than 44% of the state's total loss to development, and 6 counties accounted for just under 70% of its loss. There's another graph here that you can see those actual counties, but those are Prince George's, Montgomery, Anne Arundel, Charles, Calvert, and Baltimore County. And again, most associated with development in those regions. So this slide shows you the extent of forest loss and tree canopy loss from our multiple data sets. Between 2013 and 2018, Maryland lost more than 19,000 acres of forest, okay, but gained 6,100 acres of tree canopy outside forest. They're two different classifications. They serve two different purposes, forests and tree canopies outside forest. Think of tree canopy outside forest as the trees that line your streets, forests as, serve two different ecological functions in our society. So it's important to note, however, that a significant part of the tree canopy outside forests change is forests that are being fragmented into blocks that are too small to meet the definition of forest. So we're not necessarily gaining tree canopy in Maryland really in the desired way in that instance. So I also did want to point out there's a bar on the far right for the lower eastern shore. We actually saw increases in forest cover there, and the study cites that that's primarily due to the active timber industry down there, and likely from harvested forest regrowth, could point to some benefits within the management of forest lands there. And again, it shows you this highly skewed results that we're getting from local trends. You can see on the far left that, again, Montgomery and Prince George's County accounted for a large percentage of what the loss we were seeing. And this just shows you the variability in that. So we were also asked to investigate forest health, and this is another major finding of our report, is that Maryland forests are increasingly fragmented and became more and more patchy between 2013 and 2018 than they already were. Forests are turning into tree canopy outside forests, again, those two classifications that I mentioned, which leads to more isolated forest patches. This means less valuable habitat. This means higher vulnerability to things like invasive species. And we saw this trend, especially in central Maryland, where there was an increase in isolated patches and a decline in core forest sizes. So the issue with invasive species also points to the importance of forest management, strengthening programs that promote forest health. And this is just to show you really this like patchy mosaic nature of Maryland's landscape here. You see a lot of tree canopy outside forests, some forests intermingled with schools, roads, and what have you. And this is indicative of what we see all around the state. Our progress toward Chesapeake Bay restoration. So we were asked to look at this. Basically, the Bay Watershed Agreement sets a goal for jurisdictions in the watershed, all states and DC, to have 70% tree canopy coverage in riparian buffer areas by 2025. We're not quite at that goal. But again, if you look at regional trends, some counties are further along than others. Again, variability in data here, and the progress is skewed. There's also been an overall substantial net loss of urban tree canopy, especially in Montgomery and Prince George's County, and the expansion of urban tree canopy is important to the Bay watershed. But however, while we're losing losing trees in some urban areas, there has been some positive gains in places like Baltimore City. You have some places like on the shore, like Easton or Chestertown, that have established tree planting programs. Again, points to the benefits of policy. We were asked to investigate protected forested areas in Maryland. We found that in 2018, 33% of Maryland's forests and 9% of the tree canopy outside forests were located within protected areas. And protected lands experience a significantly lower rate of forest loss and a much higher rate of tree canopy increase when you compare that with statewide rates. Protected areas had a net gain of 2,200 acres over total tree canopy, and this demonstrates that protected areas offer a source of tree canopy gain in addition to protecting forests from loss. However, noting the issues like the prevalence of invasive species and other pressures, the study also does recommend the management of these protected areas be a priority for health.
Senator Kagan.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Josh, before you go on to the next slide, the middle bullet with an increase in protected lands between 2018 and 2021. Is that a fantastic increase and we're at the cutting edge nationally, or it's kind of lame and we could be doing a lot better? Or can you just put some of that in context? Because those numbers, and for anyone who's listening from home or not able to read the slides, statewide 26.9% of land is protected, was protected in 2018. And then the slide said it's 29% in 2021. I'd love to have some idea what that is from your perspective.
Thank you for the question. If it's okay, I'll have Susan help answer that.
Thank you.
So the statewide Maryland and these numbers, the middle bullet, where we've progressed to 29% land protected in Maryland, that reflects the Chesapeake Bay program's goals and now a national goal to achieve this 30% of land protected regionally and nationwide by 2030. And my understanding is that Maryland has achieved 30% or will be announcing achieving 30%. So this is due to, there's a lot more funding available for land protection, and Maryland has been a leader in this area. So definitely in terms of national leadership. And then, you know, because Maryland natural lands tend to be forested, we also have a relatively higher part of our forests within protected areas. And that does include protected lands as well as private conservation and agricultural historical easements included in those numbers as well.
So that's really helpful. And I'm not about to ask a softball, so please don't hear it as one. Does that mean kind of we're doing great and we don't need to make significant progress in this area and we can refocus elsewhere? Or is it important that we just continue trying to increase and just overachieve?
We did find in the study, so in terms of what could increase forest and tree canopy outside forest area across the state. So tree planting plays a really important role, but we found that it takes 5 to 15 years for newly planted trees to appear in data like the data we use. So to meet the definition of a forest or the height to be a tree. We also found, and it was a bit of a surprise, we expected that protected areas wouldn't lose forest cover, but this 2,000 acres in net tree canopy gain, we have a lot of protected land across the state that, like I said, agricultural easements that are implementing riparian forest buffers or recreational areas and other types of protected areas that are really sort of parks and playgrounds. They have a lot of opportunities to increase tree canopy. The last point is that when retaining forest cover, we found that most of the increases where we saw gains come from those medium age trees. So like 20 to 50-year-old trees, they increase in area the most. So protecting existing tree canopy can generate increases more quickly than you will see from tree planting. Of course, they both play an important role.
And as we go through the presentation, if any member has a question, we can, okay, we're not going to wait till the end. Okay, sir, back to you.
Thank you. So moving on to the forest mitigation portion of our study, we were asked to investigate the capacity of counties to receive banks and the location of those banks. Well, I'm going to get into what forest mitigation is really quick. So forest mitigation banking is when in the Forest Conservation Act has reforestation and afforestation requirements for development projects to mitigate forest loss. You can either have on-site mitigation, off-site mitigation, or you can pay a fee in lieu of doing forest mitigation activities. Purchasing credits from privately owned forest mitigation banks is one off-site option. There were two types of banks that we investigated: planted and retention banks. Retention banks are established from a current stand of forest that's already there. But those are being phased out, like I said, by 2024, according to House Bill 991 or the Tree Solutions Now Act. So we found that there are over 17,000 acres of forest mitigation banks in Maryland total, and about 4,700 of those are active or available for the purchase of credits. However, those numbers have likely changed since the completion of this study, which was based on 2018, 2019 data. I even heard yesterday during a bill hearing in the House that Montgomery County has no credits available, and I think we had some accounted for that in this study. We also looked at the number of planted banks in the state versus the number of retention banks in the state. And what we found across the state is 81.1% of the reported mitigation acres protected existing forests. So that's the retention banks. And then 18.9 were newly planted banks. So our study suggests that if planted banks continue to be a priority, there may need to be steps taken to encourage planted banks. However, the study also notes that the importance of how important retention banks have been to areas like Prince George's County, for instance, who's been losing forest and keeping the forests that are there and viable as forests. So retention banks have been important in that matter. And the last task we looked into before I get into our recommendations were tree planting programs. I will say it was difficult to gather data for this tree planting program aspect. There are many tree planting programs on all levels, from federal, local, state, you've got private, nonprofit, whatnot. So we tried, it was hard to do a comprehensive view of this, but what we did find we're able to calculate in 2018 and 2019 where government and private tree planting programs are responsible for planting estimated 1,800 acres, more than half of which was in response to the Forest Conservation Act. So, but what we do find in this portion of the study is the tree planting trend should continue, again, with the Tree Solutions Now Act goal of 5 million trees. And then we also found that there's ample land providing area for the opportunity to plant trees. Our study identified over 373,000 acres. And this photo in here, those pink areas, this is an area of Baltimore City. That's an example of some plantable areas. And those are non-agricultural lands, by the way. So the study noted that planting only about 3.3% of the identified area in the study, you could reach the Tree Solutions Now Act goal by doing that. And our final recommendations here. It's also very important to note that this study was not intended to make policy recommendations. What we did here, we wanted this to be an objective scientific analysis so you could use non-biased data and make policy with that and to provide guidance and context. So as such, these are the following recommendations we make is consider how policies are impacting different areas of Maryland that are seeing different trends. Again, I pointed to the differences between the statewide data and the local and regional trends. There's a big difference there, and some actions may need to be customized. Consider programs and policies that will protect the health of our forests and reduce fragmentation. According to the University of Maryland Extension, most of Maryland's wood parcels are between 1 and 9 acres in size. This is an increase in fragment, and it's only increasing, and they're privately held. So, and this is an increased fragmentation, creates issues with forest health, and also invasives continue to play a detrimental role when forests continue to be fragmented and get smaller and smaller. And then continue forest monitoring. You know, we would like to do studies like this more often. We think it's good to have updates like this pretty often so you can ensure that you're in touch with the environmental, economic, and social justice goals that's been set. And it helps really identify long-term trends and drivers of those trends, and then we can respond to it. And then also there was a recommendation to push for more standardized and consistent data across all of the whole state. For instance, it was difficult pulling some of the forest mitigation information out of counties whose staff just aren't equipped to handle those types of questions sometimes. So I think with that, I'll let you move on to questions. I know you're busy.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. That was excellent. So any questions for Mr. Bollinger or any of the panelists? Senator Augustine.
I'm new to this. I'm just curious. So can you just let me know where we are on the 5 million trees and what that looks like? Just real cliff notes, high level and, number of years. Can you just share it and how we're going to get it done and everything?
So I know this, our study in particular didn't look at that, that policy was passed after.
I know. But you're in the.
Yeah.
All right, Susan may be able to answer it.
So
Tangentially.
the Maryland Department of the Environment in particular, Rachel Lamb is leading, she led the development of a plan for the 5 Million Trees Act and the Tree Solutions Now Act. We found in our study about 1,800 acres of planted trees, but we were looking at 2018 to 2019. So very recent tree planting that's accelerated. It was not included in our study. And I think the recommendation that Josh pointed out, if we can centralize the collection of that data, it will, because we know it's going to take 5 to 15 years to see it in satellite imagery. Let's try to report those plantings the way we report like Chesapeake Bay restoration.
Just one.
There's
quick-
centralized data.
One quick follow. So what's the acreage? Because you guys are now giving some context of the acreage. Like what's the acreage it's going to take for that?
I can't, sorry, math off the top of my head, but generally the assumption is 400 trees per acre. So 5 million trees, 400 trees per acre will give you the acreage goal.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Thank you.
Senator Hester.
Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I have a specific question about the invasive grass that is in a lot of our
Mhm.
forests and state parks. Is that a concern, and is anything being done about it?
In the invasive species part, it's referred to as Japanese stiltgrass or Nepalese brown top. Those are certain names are used interchangeably. It's very widespread. I wouldn't say that it affects forest cover, but it really detrimentally affects the understory of forest. Other invasives like English ivy, Chinese wisteria, the vines that overtop trees, those will actually kill trees and could affect plantings. So the Forest Service was the only source of centralized data on that, but found that of forests, 12% showed disturbance within forests and invasive species were the most common form. So we see that all around urbanized areas and roadside forests.
Should we be worried about it, and is anything being done by it? And who would we ask? Like which?
It's a big challenge. It's something that Maryland DNR is very well aware of in the Maryland Forest Service, but I think addressing that, I think the general feeling is that there has not been a lot of coordinated funding on trying to attack important invasive species in a comprehensive way. It just tends to be very piecemeal, and it's you know, especially where they could prevent forests from growing back, it will increasingly be a problem affecting us.
Sure.
Suggestion, like, do we need to do a study, like, or is DNR already actively working on it? It sounds like it needs some attention and some funding. So what would you recommend?
My understanding is that there's some sort of proposed and recently passed legislation. So things like stopping selling. I mean, the plant you're referring to is a wild, sort of like a weedy species. It's not sold, but we also have invasives like English ivy that you can still buy at garden centers. We should not be selling them. There's been legislation addressing that and also calls for increased funding. But I would say it's generally understood to be not being addressed in a very coordinated way.
Okay, so we're going to go to Senator Washington. Why don't you have the last question, because we do want to get to our bill hearings for today.
For sure. And my question, I think, is a good follow-up to my colleague to the left. What sort of, did you find any coordination, or should there be more coordination between state highway administration? And are they, who's maintaining the forests along all of our highway, at least our state-owned highways? We could start there.
Mm-hmm. We didn't look specifically at road right-of-ways, but I do know that those are, but there's a certain amount right next to the highway that's considered unplantable, and our plantable area data excluded that. But there are, when you get a little further away from the edge of the highway system does own a lot of land, which we pay a lot of money to mow, that maybe would be more beneficial if planted with trees or other purposes. But that was not addressed in this study, so I just want to be clear on that. But there's an opportunity to look at this plantable areas data and land ownership where those opportunities are.
Can I make one more point? Is I know you have to move on. So, and this is again, very nuanced, detailed study. If any of you want to dig deeper into this, Hughes Center and Susan, we're happy to meet with you, your offices personally and go through it.
Okay, I want to thank you and the whole team for the presentation. That was very, again, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, for technical reasons, we need to take a 10-minute break before we start the bill hearings. I've been advised by our crack whip tech person over here that we got to reboot and do some stuff. So either stay in your seat, but we're going to start in exactly 10 minutes our bill hearings, okay?